All right. Well, let's get started. So first, cheers. Everyone raise your glass.
Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
That's fine.
All right. Janine, we're coming to you first today. What are you getting on the on this palette?
So delicious. I was not expecting it to be so good. I'm sorry, but I don't love Sauvignon Blanc, so it's very good.
Yeah. Do you taste anything in particular?
I'm a noob, so I'll let you guys take it.
All right. We'll go to Joshua and Maria. What are you tasting on this? And then Mick and Bridget after that.
I tasted a bit of apple.
Bit of apple.
Mm-hmm. And you tasted something tart?
Tart. It was definitely tart. Yeah.
Pineapple was what I was. Pineapple?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely Sauvignon.
Yeah, it's definitely Sauvignon.
Mm-hmm. Definitely tart, fruity for sure. I don't know if that's like a apricot-y something maybe going on.
Mm.
Nice. How about Stephanie and Lauren?
We actually had this with our Creole that we made a couple days ago, and so we got 2 bottles of it. And like normally I'm not a Sauvignon Blanc person, and it was fabulous. Like I really, really love this bottle. But for me, it's tart, very crisp, like a little bit of like grapefruit notes.
Yeah.
Getting a lot of citrus in here. How about Tom? Tom and Sarah.
We're getting a bit of butter, which is pretty tasty.
Yeah. I noticed that.
So oak.
Little oak. And Amelia?
Yeah, I don't feel it's super fruity, which I kind of like. You know, some of those New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs are like over the top. This is a bit more tart, and you can drink it without feeling like you have a ton of sugar in your mouth.
Yeah. And Jay Bird, close us out a bit.
Yeah, I mean, nice and crisp. You know, but not too dry. Very refreshing. Yeah. It's almost like almost close to a sparkling almost. You know, that crisp.
You're a bit muted. I didn't catch that. Close to something.
But almost close to a sparkling. That crisp.
Oh, close to a sparkling. Yeah, it's pretty dry. I'm also getting a little vanilla notes on my my bottle, like buttery and vanilla.
Mm-hmm.
A bit, almost like that, like a butterscotch kind of thing. But so that's what we're getting. And again, there's how many of us are here? Nine different people on the call. We have 9 different bottles. There may be a slight bottle variation, temperature, and all that other stuff. So there's no wrong answer here, which is great. So it's my pleasure to introduce Shaunt from Lunes, Populis. He can explain what the 2 labels are, what the difference is, and tell us a little bit about this wine.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for inviting me. This is pretty awesome. Excited to hang out for a little bit right now. Yeah, this is our Populis Sauvignon Blanc. So it's me and my partner, Diego. We make the Lunes wines and Populis wines. So we started making wine together back in 2014. We met at UC Davis studying at the wine program together at the master's program there, studying viticulture and enology. And then after that, we both moved to France independently, but we're working always kind of nearby each other and tasting with a lot of winemakers and, you know, visiting people, drinking a lot of wine and talking about stuff. And when we both, after a couple of years of working there, we both moved back to California. We're both from California, want to start making wine.
Where in France did you spend most of your time?
I spent a vintage in Anjou in the Loire Valley. Diego is in Chinon. And then I moved to Southern Burgundy in Macomb. I worked with a guy, Philippe Valette, down in Macomb there. And then Diego was in Fougères in the South, working with Didier Barral. So a lot of Carignan and Mourvedre and those kind of grapes. So coming back.
Let's talk about this wine specifically, and then we can get into your background.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So this is our, let's see, Populis Sauvignon Blanc. So with the Populis wines, we work with a couple different growers up in Mendocino County, but primarily Larry Venturi. So Larry Venturi, his family has had a ranch up there near Calpella, which is just north of Ukiah. I'm not sure how familiar all of y'all are with Mendocino County, but you take Highway 101 and you keep going north. You go through Santa Rosa and it's about an hour north of Santa Rosa. And
it's about 3 hours north of San Francisco, to give everybody a geographic location.
Yeah. And it's kind of a, pretty decent sized valley there. It's not quite as cool as like the Anderson Valley, but it does get some of the kind of coldness that you get in California during the nights and weekends. And so Larry's been great. His family's been farming there since the late 1800s, and some of their vines date back even in the 1920s. We work with some really old Carignan, and with the Sauvignon Blanc, his grandfather planted this in the late 1940s. So some of the oldest Sauvignon Blanc still kind of around in that area in California. And so that's what really drew us to come work with him and work with Sauvignon Blanc. I heard kind of a lot of you say, like, I don't know, normally drink Sauvignon Blanc, and I was kind of in the same way. I spent one vintage in New Zealand, and I'm like, if I never drink another Sauvignon Blanc again, I'm probably pretty happy. And so when Larry called us to tell us about these vines, this block that became available, he said Sauvignon Blanc, and we're like, I don't know about that. But he's like, no, you got to come check it out. And I mean, if these vines are over 70 years old now, they're like these huge, bush vines, all head trained. And so knowing that these really old vine vineyard, like, regardless of my maybe some negative previous experiences with Sauvignon Blanc, we knew that something pretty special would come from these, because there's a lot of old vine vineyards up in Mendocino County, but it's really hard to find, for whatever reason, white grape varieties as old vines. So we really jumped at the chance to get the Sauvignon Blanc, and then we try not to do too much to get in the way. I think, I was hearing a lot of what y'all were saying, and I think you're really picking up on a lot of stuff, like some of the vanilla or butter. We do let it go through full malolactic fermentation. And so that can kind of give some richness while still being kind of a lower alcohol, this 12.6%. So that malolactic fermentation really gives you a lot of that creaminess and kind of butteriness and texture on the mouth. And we do age part of it in old neutral barrels to kind of, again, give another layer of texture and flavor, just to kind of add little, layers of complexity in from these different kind of vinification styles.
Yeah. So the farmer Venturi, he's all, where in Italy is he from? Is that?
His family's Sicilian, but they've been here. Yeah, they immigrated back in, like, I don't know if it was Gold Rush or just after that, but they've been around for,
yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think in the last year, the fifth of the tastings that we've done, there's a lot of Italian influence in California wine. So we were tasting the Zinfandel yesterday. So we have a few Italians on the call. Not even including myself, whose family made wine. So California wine has a huge Italian influence, which is really interesting, which is why some of these vineyards are, organically farmed and have this context to it. So
yeah, definitely.
So with everybody, if you have any questions, feel free, just throw them in the chat, and then we'll call, and you can go ahead or take yourselves off mute and ask away.
Chris, my question is for you. I noticed that you say vineyard.
Tomato, vineyard, vineyard.
Do tell.
So,
Italian or British?
Fair enough. Fair enough. So it's really hard to type it sometimes in the chat, in emails too. But,
yeah.
No, but do you do that deliberately? Is that like,
no.
I'm not trying to like give you a hard time. I'm just curious. Like, is it like something that you kind of picked up on over time, or?
I don't know. Shaunt, how do you say it?
I think I go with vineyard, but I like talking to Germans because they'll call it like wineyard. You know, they kind of they turn the V's into W's. You know, so it's, which is always kind of funny with that. You know.
I think Stephanie has a question in the chat.
Yeah. So let's talk about it. So this is the first time this has come up. It comes up a little bit more with the white wines. Is malolactic? Because I think a lot of people think of that buttery as malolactic, or sometimes like people also think about new oak as malolactic. So what's a little difference? Like, so what does malo do? What's a little malo do? And how is that different from what most people taste on new oak age?
Yeah. So I think, let's see, just to step back a little bit, and hopefully it's not, you know, I don't want to get too technical, but so in wine, there's two fermentations, the primary and the secondary. The primary fermentation is their yeasts, which are kind of a type of little fungus or whatever, same thing that makes your bread, convert sugar into alcohol. But then there's a second fermentation where there's a certain bacteria that eats the malic acid that's present in the grapes and then converts that into lactic acid. So malic acid is kind of like the acid that you find a lot in apples and is like a really crisp, like kind of hard or like very like tart type of acidity. But then lactic acid is something that you see more in like kind of dairy or milk or, you know, through those kind of cheeses and things like that. And so that's like a much creamier kind of yogurt. That's the same kind of lactic acid that is responsible for the sourness there. And so by letting the wine go through a malolactic fermentation, you kind of get this softening of the acidity and a kind of getting a little more of that creaminess or milkiness or yogurty. And I think that's where kind of some of the butter aspects come from. And so with us, like, in order to, since it's a bacteria are really resilient, and they'll, like, if there's any bacteria in the bottle and if there's any malic acid left, it'll re-ferment in the bottle. So if people stop the malic acid fermentation, maybe they want the wine to be extra crisp and really high acid, you've got to filter it, and you generally add a lot of sulfites and maybe enzymes and kind of other stuff.
So when you say it's a bit mallow, how does a natural winemaker who doesn't fine, doesn't filter, doesn't add sulfur, how do they stop it at that mid part rather than going through full mallow?
Oh, so that, well, let's see. So all of our wines go totally through malolactic fermentation.
Totally full mallow.
Yeah. Because we want the wine to be stable, but without having to do anything. I like to joke, I'm like, I'm not a very good winemaker. If I was had to filter it, I'd probably screw it up and it re-ferment in the bottle. Anyway, so you got to look for, you know, have the wine be as stable as it can be naturally. So that's why we'll pick the grapes, like a little earlier, knowing that the wine will soften up. And so it's almost like you're leading the target, like you're throwing a football to the receiver. It's like, oh, I know where the wine's going to go. So we harvest it with a little more acidity. So when it softens up, it lands kind of still crisp and fresh, as opposed to maybe some of those bigger, like buttery, oaky ones. You know, they're picking much riper because they want those like big, sweet fruit flavors. And so when you're softening something that's already really ripe, that's when it gets that really intense, buttery and.
Okay, and I apologize. I stole Haley's question. I didn't see the chat right away, but so that's so the answer is you don't stop mallow. Once it starts, you let it run.
Generally, yeah. So I think the only thing would be like in some of these, like in Germany, or sometimes if the pH is very low, like if the grapes are really high acid, it's almost like it's too acidic for the bacteria to work well, and they may not finish. So that could be really
and is there a way, like if you wanted to not have it go through mallow, is there a way you could bottle it or stop the process before it starts?
I mean, I guess
primary and secondary.
Yeah, I mean, not. I think consistently no, and then it kind of depends again, like where your definition of natural wine is. Like again, you can filter it, but maybe that's not going to cut it. And so, I think generally, I've found it's like most natural wines, yeah, they probably are going through malolactic fermentation. And if they stop, they kind of stopped on their own and kind of found their own little balance.
So this brings up a good point then, because we've heard, we've heard from a lot of natural winemakers now. And if natural winemakers pick organic grapes, throw them into a bin, let them ferment, let them go through mallow, bottle the juice, then how hard can this be?
It's a good question. No, I don't know. It's funny. I think it's kind of like, I like to say it's like, you're not doing anything, but you're doing the right nothing, right? And it's like, it's like a very minimal approach, but with that, then you can't really fix any issues. So it's like, you got to be really clean. You got to pay attention to your fermentations. And then there are little things like, if you lower the temperature, then the bacteria don't work as well, but the yeast can go stronger. So that can go through. Maybe there's an instance where you want to give it air and that promotes, the yeast, but later in the stage, if you give it air, that might promote the bacterial growth. And so having kind of some of this experience, there's a lot of little things you can do to kind of guide it ever so slightly towards, where you want to land. And
okay. So you're not just a bunch of hippies in this farm smoking weed and being like, yeah, let's bottle.
I mean, not that. I mean, I think that's what's great about natural wines too.
Is that a bad thing?
Yeah, there's a whole spectrum, of wines. Like, and I think that's what's really cool is like, natural wine in my head, it's not one thing. It's like, all wine should be natural wine, and like, I'm glad, some really funky, cloudy, crazy stuff. Like, I love drinking that. That's not how I approach to make the wine, but I'm glad that other people are, and that, because otherwise, if everyone was trying to make the same thing, then it'd be boring, and it's not any fun.
Yeah. So Shaunt, Amelia has a question. Ever the cook, Amelia?
Yeah. So what would I pair this with? Oh yeah,
Oh, I was gonna let her ask the question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was on mute. So we haven't made dinner yet, but I was just thinking, like, what should we pair this with if you were cooking tonight with this wine?
Yeah, I like with this particularly, I think Sauvignon Blanc. And again, this one I really like because it's pretty versatile because it's not too much of any of these one things. I think we try and strive for that with like a lot of our wines is to not be overpowering. So then it makes it pretty versatile. But with this, I really like right now, like asparagus is kind of coming into season. I think like asparagus with even just like a little simple omelet and some goat cheese, is like just really delightful, super simple. And like, the acid kind of cuts through the richness of the eggs and the cheese, but then that greenness from the asparagus kind of ties into kind of that on the nose, and it's just super nice in that way. I had that just a couple days ago. So
yeah. So I'll share what I paired with this, and I know I'm reluctant to do this. I may lose half the room on this. But this is what I paired with it. So if everyone can see that.
Oh.
Who would like to take a guess at what this is?
The escargot or
No.
sushi?
Alex?
My guess is pork.
Is it pork?
It is not pork.
Scallops, no?
Alex?
That is a rabbit porchetta.
Ooh.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah,
What the fuck?
yeah, I'm like, I'm gonna lose half the room on that one. It paired
That's
with
just
it
wrong.
perfect. I know. So it's wrong. You're against it. So I have so it's
And
very.
we were worried about writing it in papillote. Like, we thought that would be
We thought of
pretentious.
pretentious, like we had salmon and papillotes.
Yeah, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I made so the rabbit is sourced from my good friends over at the Fatted Calf in Napa and in Sonoma, and it's rolled up, and it's just like making porchetta out of pork, but instead you do it out of rabbit. I mean, I've isolated alone here. I can't make an entire porchetta for myself. So,
Well, that's good because pork is, like it's going to shit right now. So all the plants are closing.
it paired perfectly with this wine. It was cooked sous vide for an hour and a half, and then
Of course it was.
Of course it was. Right. So and then finished on the pan. You know, butter basted and everything. So yeah, that's so that's how we rolled with the Populis Sauvignon Blanc.
Cool. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I think kind of like the white meat, you know, the rabbit's kind of white meat, chicken, pork kind of thing, like super nice there.
So that's what I did with it. I saw a lot of people pairing last night and figured I should up my game on this one today. All right, so let's get back to your story. Like, so you and Diego go off to France. You're in different places. You're staying in touch.
Yeah.
You come back to California, and now you're like, all right, let's make wine together. Like, so tell us how that goes.
Yeah. So we met at Davis, and it was cool. There was a good group of students at the time that were really getting into natural wines. It was like funny to get into that at UC Davis, which is kind of known for more intervention and more kind of conventional winemaking. But it was like ourselves, Martha Stuman was there at that time. There's a couple of people up in Oregon that are making wine. A few other people in California also. And, you know, we were kind of pushing each other. Oh, let's taste different stuff and see different things. And it was really a great like way to get into that and experience natural wines and kind of through the lens of this very technical, like focused, you know, scientific winemaking program. So you can, again, kind of know the rules in order to break them, if you will. So when Diego and I came back, we also really wanted to start farming vineyards and working the land, because a lot of the people we worked with in France were, you know, from pruning to bottling, really the whole way through. And on the particularly the smaller scale in California, there's not a ton of that, especially at that time. And so we set out with the goal of really trying to find vineyards well, I couldn't buy any, but to lease or to rent. And when we started out, since we didn't have any experience or connections or anything like that, you know, we had someone's half-acre vineyard, you know, vineyard in Petaluma, but we were calling different people, and that's where we found like Larry Venturi, for instance. And you know, we'd never be able to work with his old vine Carignan or Sauvignon Blanc if we limited ourselves to just what we grow. And we had so much to learn from him as well, because he's been farming, you know, he and his family for over 100 years up in that area. And so it's been great buying grapes from him, so then we can, you know, learn like his methods, his process is really like a truly Californian viticulture, as opposed to a lot of more modern stuff. They look at, oh, what are you doing in France? What are you doing in Burgundy and Bordeaux? Let's bring that to Napa. And you're like, no, it doesn't work, because here it's hot and dry, over there it's cold and wet, you know, so we have a lot of different problems.
Yeah. Hey, I want to ask a question, because Tom asked a question about the ingredients. So we've talked to 4 producers right now. 2 of them have no sulfur added, that ingredients grapes. 2 of them have added a little sulfur. So you've added a little sulfur. Can you talk a little bit about how much and what the thought process was behind that?
Yeah. So with the sulfur, so some of our wines we make without sulfur, some of them we do. And really for us, you know, we're probably, number one is trying to avoid, like, you know, the dreaded mouse taint, which drives me crazy. You know, I can't really handle that too much. And so we never
describe mouse taint. There's a lot of people on this call that don't know what mouse is.
Okay. So with particularly with like very low or no sulfur wines, there's a certain different bacteria can produce a certain compound that they call it mouse taint, and it supposedly smells like mouse urine, or like the wood shavings in a mouse cage or something. And it really comes at the very finish. Like, you take a sip, the wine tastes great, and then you breathe out your nose like 10 seconds later, and it's like this very powerful.
It's like when your dog farts in your face, really.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's basically what it is too.
Yeah, so it's kind of a mostly bacterial kind of like instability with the wine. And so we found what we do is before we bottle, about 2 weeks before, we'll bottle some wines, like only, maybe 6 bottles. Half of them we add sulfur, the other half we don't, and we see if it develops, if it goes away quickly, because it kind of can come and go in bottles as well. Yeah. Because otherwise we don't add any sulfites. The reason why people add sulfites to wine is because they're such a good antimicrobial, and they can help to keep down, the vinegar smells, some of the off like spoilage, yeast and bacteria and stuff. But we're really trying to ride that razor's edge, because I think it's important. And if we're all familiar with natural wines, just like anything else, a flaw is only a flaw after some certain threshold. I like to use like an analogy with like when you're cooking a dish, if you don't put enough salt, like your dish tastes flat. If you put the right amount, you don't necessarily taste the salt, but then if you put too much, then it tastes like hot and too salty and it's ruined. But you wouldn't say that salt is like a spoilage thing. It's like there could be too much. So the same thing is with the wine faults. Like they're only faults after things go too far. So you kind of want to, again, like push it to the limit where your wine has these quote unquote faults in it, but they're never too strong that then they become the focus of the wine. Yeah. I think like with this, it's like there's volatile acidity, the vinegar taste, but that helps to bring out some of the fruit and make it really bright and lively. But it's not so strong that when you smell it, you're like, oh, this smells like vinegar, and it's distracting you from, the sense of great variety, the vineyards, the vintage, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think this is what's important, and so one of the reasons why, like my original, like my preference would be no sulfur added. Wine have nothing else in there. But that's not always possible. So the secondary preference is about the farmer and the intent and the maker. So where is this coming from, and what is people's backgrounds in doing this? And intent is a very important thing. Is that a lot of people really want to know what's the exact number of sulfite to make a judgment, and so far we're resisting putting that label on it because there are people like Shaunt and Lunes and Populis that there's sulfites in some of them, there's not in others. And when the moment you draw a line in the sand, the one thing that I know is going to happen is like, if you draw a line in the sand and say like, my line is like 20 parts per million or 25 parts per million, I almost am guaranteed that the next weekend I'm going to go out and meet a farmer who's a fantastic person who cultivates by hand, does all these things, and they add 26 parts per million in their wine, and I'm going to have to make a judgment call. So it seems like a very arbitrary numbers to people, but it really comes back to knowing who the winemaker is and knowing their intent of why we do this.
Yeah. So in this particular bottling, we added it was 15 parts per million ppm, or 15 milligrams per liter of sulfur. And so just a super small dose. Again, we felt that it needed just a little bit of help to get through because the bottling is kind of it's a really harsh period for the wines. It can kind of throw them off. But I think you're right in that having kind of arbitrary numbers set in stone, because it's like, oh, maybe what if this wine was aged for 5 years in barrel and you're adding, you had to add 10 parts each year or something, then, it ends up being less than maybe if you added 20 parts to a wine that was super young. There's a lot of, again, kind of gray areas and things. And I think you're right. Also, it's like, let's not just, that's something that's easy to focus on, but then like, let's talk about the farming and what we do in the vineyards, and how that like can be even more, how do you push the boundaries there?
All right, great. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. I want to ask Janine a question because she was very enthusiastic, like thumbs up when I asked the sulfite question. So Janine, I'm curious what your enthusiasm was for that question.
No, I just had no idea what Mousy meant. Like, I'm so to the natural world and I love it. So please keep me up with the words and the.
Oh yeah, So I do try and be conscious of people in the natural wine world use terms that they expect everywhere now, or maybe not expect, but assume maybe that everybody knows, and that was one that I knew not everybody would know. So now actually, Shaunt, I want to get back. You just brought up the farming. So we had a great photo of you putting manure in horns.
Oh yeah,
What is that all about?
So that we're starting to dip into doing some of the biodynamic preparations. So biodynamic farming, that's like a, kind of offshoot of organic farming, where there was these, based on these philosophies of this like Austrian guy from back in the 1920s and 30s.
Yeah.
And so what that is that's a certain preparation where you put cow manure in these like cow horns, and then you bury them and they kind of compost under the soil. And the idea is that they're kind of capturing like the energy from the cosmos and this and that. And then you unearth them in the springtime, and then you spray that on your vineyard. So there's a lot of great, different microbes and other things. But I think, it kind of speaks to, what they say is like the best fertilizer is a farmer's footsteps, and so like being involved and being in your vines is really the most important thing. And so like if you want to focus on biodynamics and making these preps, like that's great. And so that's a good way to do it. Like I don't think that that's necessarily critical. And again,
I was gonna say, I love this time because a lot of times people say, and we take up a lot of real estate on emails and posts saying organic or biodynamic grapes, and biodynamic really falls into that. Like this is when it starts to sound like hippy dippy shit, according to the moon cycles, and bury manure to capture the energy we harvest. So, but what does it do to the grapes, or like? So why are you dipping your toe into biodynamic?
Well, yeah, I think it's something we're checking out and trying out, and because we've been hesitant so far because we were never able to we didn't have the capacity or the space or the time to make the preparations ourselves. Because I think again with anything it's too easy it could be like a marketing thing, because you can buy a little packet of the composted cow manure from a horn, and it comes from some guy in like Alabama or whatever. And then you spray it, and then you can be certified biodynamic and this and that. And it's like, that's totally missing the point. You know what I mean? And so we wanted to do it. It's like, okay, let's make the preparation from a farmer that I know, and I know those cows. We're doing it in the vineyard that we're going to spray it on. And then, that's really going to help try to capture some of that energy into the grapes and into the wine.
Yeah.
And, again, hopefully make for more like alive, more vitality in the grapes, and hopefully you take that energy in the wine.
Yeah. And that brings up a good point too, is that the difference between certified and not certified. And so this is what you just expressed is what a lot of people's fears are with labels and everything. That if you have a certification, a lot of smaller farmers think that's just a tax. Like, you're making me pay money to get some government agency to tell me the way I farm is a certain way, and I'd rather just farm a certain way and have people buy it that way. And we do sell the number of wines that are not certified organic, but the farmers, our importers know the farmers and they know they're organic. It's a big difference, because if you can manipulate a scorecard to get certified, people do that. They're going to buy the packet of manure from someone from Alabama. So how do you approach that?
Yeah, no, I mean, so since we don't, like, kind of going back, we make Populis wines and then Leylun wines. And the big difference between the two is Leylun, that's the stuff we grow. Populis are the wines that we we buy from like these old school farmers up in Mendocino County. And for us, again, yeah, we don't care about certification so long as, you know, we trust the farmer, or with ourselves, like we don't own this land. So like, it's hard to put in the investment or the time if someone could drop our lease, or it costs us money. And it's because people know, because I think in the end of the day, you know, any label like natural wine or organic or biodynamic or whatever, what's much more important is transparency. And I think that's what comes back to like our ingredient labeling. You know, like alcohol is the only thing that you consume in the US that isn't required to have labels. And so much of even conventional wines are trying to sell like this image of like the beautiful sunset and this and that and whatever. And it's like, it's bullshit, because it's all yeasted and conventionally farmed and whatever. It's like, what in the end of the day, what's important is not the title, like, is this natural wine? Is it not natural wine? It's like, no, let me tell you exactly what we did. And then you can make that decision yourself, like informed.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best way to take care of anything.
You know,
like,
it's interesting. You made the anecdote about the label, right? And the labels are, you know, so we talked a lot about labels last night. We had one of the artists on, and people buy, they make decisions on labels. And I think it's really interesting that you're talking about the New Zealand wines that you have. And what was the most well-known or prominent New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc you've ever had?
Oh, wasn't it like Kim Crawford or something like that? Yeah.
The other one that was real, the wine that put New Zealand on the map was Cloudy Bay.
Oh, Cloudy Bay. Yeah.
Cloudy Bay put New Zealand on the map. Cloudy Bay was one of those wines that actually, even if you read the book on the Judgment of Paris, and they talk about new wine regions, Cloudy Bay was one of those wines that, like, this is the wine that put New Zealand on the map. That is the wine that had eucalyptus notes that just blew everybody's mind. And what's interesting is that a lot of people, if you look at a lot of labels for New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc right now, even organically farmed ones and Whole Foods and other ones, the labels completely mimic Cloudy Bay's label. Right? And so many people have bought, I won't name the wine, other bay, they're all over the place. You will see them the next time. You'll see them the next time you go to a store and you see New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. And you'll see this something bay with the clouds in the back and everything that are designed to almost like capture that ethos. So that's really okay. So Amelia's got a story for us.
I just wanted to share, as part of my MBA when I was at St. Mary's, we went to New Zealand and did global competition and strategy. So one of the classes we did was at a winemaker in New Zealand, and they taught us a lot, like the winemaker and how all of their bottles are actually 15% lighter than any wine bottle in the world, because they have to ship it so far, and none of the wine can leave New Zealand without it being approved by this group of winemakers, because they're a small country. It's like their brand, right? So I raised my hand and I'm like, oh, there's this great wine. I've had it in Sausalito so many times. It's from here. Where's Oyster Bay? And the guy laughed. He's like, there's no such thing. It's just a label from New Zealand. So it was so embarrassing in front of my whole class, and the winemaker's like rolling his eyes.
It's really funny that that's the one you mentioned, because that was the name I was trying not to say.
That's funny.
It's at Costco. It's everywhere.
It's everywhere, and it picked up on the popularity of Cloudy Bay, which really kind of brought everything out. And it's I had a I'm gonna stop there before I tell a bad story about an ex-girlfriend. So yeah, that's why labels are important, but also understanding. That's why it's so important to know the source of your grapes and the producer and all that. Because that's the other thing, that certifications are nice, but certifications can be manipulated completely, and that's a big problem in the industry, in every industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think like even Walmart is like the biggest purchaser of organic produce, you know, and it's like there's a difference between that and like what you get from your farmer's market or something, you know. And so again, like getting to know the producers and or you know working with either wine shops or like with Chris, it's like the people that can dig in and it really get to connect with the producers, then like that really helps you know and trust like where it's coming from for sure, you know.
Yeah, and organically farmed. There's a lot of huge organic farms that are machine harvested and everything else. So there's a lot that goes on to it just besides organically farmed, which is why we don't mind working with producers that are not quote unquote certified organic, but we go out, we visit the vineyards, or our distributors visit the vineyards, we meet the people, we have dinner with them, we drink with them, we know where their heart and their soul is, and we know what their philosophy on life is. And this is why we say process matters. And there's the reason why I got into this business to do it is that it was also an outcrop of my personal business philosophies, which I work with a lot of really shitty people in Silicon Valley, you know, a lot of really shitty people. And I was like, the ends do not justify the means. So, you know, my philosophy has been everything in my life, if I can make sure that the process matches the results, that's what I'm going to be. And I will pay a premium for that. I will pay a premium for people who do things the right way, do it ethically, and do it with heart, rather than just, you know, well, I sold it, so my process was correct. That's bullshit.
Yeah.
That's more bullshit than stuffing manure in cows and burying it for 3 months, right? That's serious bullshit. So, all right. Any other questions on the line?
This is Elisa. I don't speak up too much, but I thought that was a really interesting conversation that you're mentioning about process and sort of the desire to do things well. And I think, you know, like Alice Feiring's article in the New York Times last year, some of the things that came out in the New Yorker last year, like really pointed to natural wine kind of reaching that point where, you know, a lot of people are in it because it's now profitable, and sort of how you keep things feeling like, quote, pure. And also around some of the sexism that has happened and Anthony Kalin and all that stuff. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the industry and how it's responded to sort of the money that's come in and like in general kept its true to its roots.
That's a good question. So Sean, any particular part about the industry, about how it's grown and everything, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, obviously like the stuff with Anthony is like terrible and should not be around. And, you know, I think that kind of, you know, hopefully can be snuffed out or put somewhere. And I think hopefully the natural wine community is more open and willing to be progressive and like tackle some of those issues. There was one of the, if any of y'all are familiar with Ordinaire, one of the workers at Ordinaire before their big wine fair in Brumaire earlier in March, which, wow, that's like a long time ago. But they had a whole day spent, you know, we were trying to talk about, you know, being inclusive, not only different genders, but different, you know, ethnicities, and how can the natural wine world be more inclusive? And I think, you know, as progressive as we can be, there's a lot of work to continue and to do. And it's something to always think about, and how to be better and how to do better. And then particularly, like you're saying, when people are kind of moving into the space in a more profiteering kind of way or something. And I think for me personally, like, it seems like one of those rising tide situations. You know, if someone's coming in, you know, trying to make a buck on it, and they're selling it in bigger grocery stores or to broader market, maybe that gets people interested, and then they want to, when they dig deeper, they find out what we're doing. You know, like, we've only seen it be easier and easier to sell our wines and reach a broader audience. So like, at this point, you know, like, I guess there's fakers out there making wines with a nice label, but then not good stuff behind it. But it seems like it's easier than ever to get the real stuff too. And there's more of it ever that is available, you know, more wine shops, more wine clubs, more distributors, more importers. And so I think that's really heartening, that as maybe there's a little bit of, you know, the other stuff creeping in, there's more, even more than ever before, of really good, really real, really like powerful stuff too.
Yeah. And I agree with that assessment. It's like, so I always think back and I look at like statistics and like you look at type 1 versus type 2 errors, or like errors of commission versus errors of commission, which is, you know, you can't optimize for both. It's like things that you should have done that you didn't, or things that you shouldn't have done that you did, right? You can't optimize for both of those. And the classic example is the penal system, right? So do you let criminals go free, or do you convict innocent people, right? You have to optimize for one of those two things. So I would rather more natural wine, more like that market grow substantially. And there are going to be some posers and fakers. And as we said yesterday, fugazis, there are going to be some fugazis there, but eventually they will be self-weeded out, right? I'd rather have that market grow that way than put so many tight controls in to keep the fugazis out that it keeps the real natural wine market small. Right? I would rather have the organic wine, native yeast, unfiltered, unfined, low sulfur added. I'd rather see that pervade and go through, which is why, again, to Elise's point, it's like I'm very unique in this market that I am not profit motivated right now. I have, like a lot of people, I have another full-time job. My goal is to, like, I am very happy. If you love this wine, if I've introduced you to this wine and you go buy a case on Lunes' website directly, where he makes more profit selling directly to consumer than through a distributor, I'm very happy about that. I'm very happy about that. We said the same thing about Subject to Change, same thing about Cavalli. Please go do that, right? Because like, you do not need to go through me for that. That is not why I'm doing this. Now, obviously, I have expenses and I want to do this, but I have a different job. So this is not my motivation. So that's not, you know, like, I'm not a good businessman in the wine world because that's not my motivation.
Yeah, and I think like just to add one more thing is, you know, if anything, the pressure almost can come from within, and that's almost, you know, could be an issue. Is like you know, and I can think of a few examples that I don't necessarily want to say, but, you know, people that forged kind of this industry, reached a lot of success, and then essentially like sold out, you know, and are still kind of considered, you know, in this pantheon, but then the wines have kind of lost a lot of their original luster, you know? And so I think with any sort of success, there does exist like the temptation or the potential for like selling out and like a
yeah. And we'll be clear, there are, and I don't want to call them out. Even these companies in New Zealand, I don't want to name my name. I'm not here to try and call people out, but there are plenty of wines in the natural wine world that pour at natural wine festivals that are not natural wine, that are fugazis. They're there. Yeah. I'm not going to be the one to call them out right now, but if you just look, some of them are look at their tech sheets. They're fine. They're filtered. They have egg whites in. They do all these other things. They're yeah, Ginny. They're posers, right? They are posers glomming onto the natural wine, unregulated thing. Yeah, right? That's going to happen. But for the time being, they're lifting all the boats. And I think people who dig in and learn a little bit more and get a little bit more educated, then they realize, like, oh, that wine that I've been posting on Instagram for the last 6 months that I thought I really liked, well, they're actually a poser. So I'm gonna just migrate my taste to something that's a little bit more.
Yeah. And it's a, you know, it's a learning process. And like I said, like there's never been a better time than right now for access and of where natural wines are, how much there is, how much good natural wine there is. Like this is the best. We're in the golden age, and it's only getting better.
Yeah. And Elisa, you had a couple more parts to that question. Did you want to ask? Your question had like multiple layers, which were really interesting, which I love to talk about.
Sure. I mean, I know we're at time. I just think it's an interest. I went to like a dinner with Alice Feiring last year. I think she's a badass, and I thought what she had to say, like there's just been a lot of press in the past year about a variety of these sort of topics, and I think that's true. I work in Silicon Valley.
And I'm happy. And I'm happy to go on the record now. Is that, again, I don't know all the details, but I think she got a bad rap over her response to the woman. I mean, it's like you get a couple messages over text, you don't have the context or whatever. You know.
I mean, I think Alice should have responded better in that moment by miles. But like overall, I think she's a badass woman. So.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, she could have done better, and she could have you don't know the whole thing, so. You know, but I think where I say is like, I always go back to intent is like, yeah, maybe she could have responded better. Probably we could all agree that she could have responded better. I'll put the link to the article for people who are not familiar with what we're talking about. It really blew up. Alice was the first person. So Alice Feiring is a very important person in natural wine. She was one of the first people to write about natural wine years ago. She released her fourth, I think, book on the topic last year called Natural Wine for the People, which is a fantastic introductory book about natural wine. Fantastic book. Highly recommend everyone get it. I'll put a link in that to the recap as well. And what we're talking about is someone approached her who had been sexually harassed, and she did not react well to it. And that conversation was publicized, and she was really taken to town for it. And yeah, she couldn't react better, but you know, I don't think that, like, my personal opinion is that you don't know crap about what other people are doing at the time that they're responding to things, how they're receiving it, how that's going. Obviously, she could have done better. She admitted that she could have been done better, but the way people are lambasting or taking it to town, I just think is unfair and uncalled for. That's just
no, and I think her the article she actually, there was the Anthony Kalin thing, but then Alice also wrote an article about like, is natural wine kind of like dead this past year, which I was also sort of
and that was also controversial, and I'm happy to link that into the article as well. Let me write that down. I've made a lot of commitments here that I need to follow, so the Alice Feiring stuff.
Well, I mean, regarding. I mean, because I'm pretty good friends with Alice. Like, she's come visit our winery a couple times, and I see her in New York and stuff. And I mean, I think, you know, it's kind of outrageous. It's like, is natural wine dead? Like, I think a certain like punk rock, like underground, you know, aspect of that, again, like, is maybe not like the same thing as it was. You know, it's definitely not as underground as previously, and maybe it's not like as hip or exclusive or whatever, but I still stand by, you know, what I said before is like, it's never been a better time to be drinking natural wine. You know, the accessibility of it, you know, you could DM someone on Instagram in, you know, a winemaker in France and go visit them. Like, I remember when I was going for my trip to go to France, like, I checked the book out from the library and was like writing down phone numbers and trying to speak to French and like get a hold of these people and stuff. And like, it was almost impossible, you know, and it wasn't there. Now you can go down to a couple wine bars, and there's not a terrible chance that there might even be a winemaker visiting on a sales trip there, you know. And it's like, maybe again, to these certain like gatekeepers, like, it's a different scene and it's more open, but like, again, I think this is better than it's ever been. You know, I don't think natural wine isn't dead. It's becoming a beautiful, accessible thing, you know, and it's hopefully replacing just a lot of garbage, soulless, bad wine.
Yeah, that article, when I read that article, I just couldn't help but think, if anybody's watched Portlandia, that episode where it's like, this is so over, right? And you know, so if anyone's seen that, it's the guy in the bar. He sees the cyclist. It's like, oh, cycling's so over, and then goatees is so over. It's just a circular logic. So I think she's been covering natural wine for so long that, you know, once the Fugazi show up, you're like, oh my God, this is so over. And that's probably a good recap on that. So I know I only committed Shaunt to an hour for this, so we're at time. So take yourselves off mute and give Shaunt a round of applause.
Yeah.
By the way, in 1 hour, my bottle's empty, so this is my last glass. So.
Cheers.
Cheers.